Hey, Father Hans Jacobse, thank you for being on. Just a brief introduction. Father Hans Jacobse has been a priest in the Orthodox Church for over 30 years. He's a senior contributor and a spiritual advisor to Patristic Faith's team. He has a bachelor's in history from the University of Minnesota. He also studied Greek at Aristotle University in Greece, which I think is one of the largest universities there, where he lived for a year and started an English language school. He is a sought-after speaker and has contributed numerous articles to various venues on religion and culture. He also runs the St. Paisios, if I'm pronouncing that correctly,
Yeah, Paisios, yeah.
Paisios Brotherhood Movement, which he encourages every man to look into and to start a chapter in the local parish. So, Father Hans or Father Jacobse,
Father Hans is fine.
Father Hans. And I was thinking we can start off with some or another issue that might be relevant to people today, be it that it concerns uh, the slighter subgroups, such as we mentioned, young men, right, or people at large, and we can
Sure.
kind of see where the conversation takes us. So, anything on your mind?
Um, well, there's a lot of young men coming into the Orthodox Church. In our conversation right before we started the recording, you mentioned alienation and the necessity of a tradition. And I think that this is a broad topic, but the culture is in real serious crisis, and young men in particular are really affected, and they're drawn to orthodoxy. Here's the thing, I don't know if you've ever read any Father Seraphim Rose, but it was kind of prophetic in a way in the 50s, talking about the incipient nihilism in the culture. Well, that's become full blown.
Mhm.
And my thesis is that, especially these young men that are born into a world where they're taught no truth exists, well, that's very crushing for the soul and it damages men. And these men are coming into the church and orthodoxy in particular because of that crushing soul pain, right? And it takes a while for them to realize that the only way out is to find the truth, whatever it is. And orthodoxy, because it has an enduring tradition, offers the solution to that existential crisis, because at the core of the tradition, of course, is Jesus Christ. And it's really different. When I first became a priest, when I first became a Christian, even before I was Orthodox, the work was primarily polemical. You were proving God exists, okay? Um, and then it just switched. About 15 years ago, it switched. The people who were coming in and people started dealing with had no experience with the church at all, any kind of religious tradition at all, and yet they didn't have any problem with accepting that God exists. And it's because in this nihilism, the soul crushing nihilism, the pain that they experienced, I mean, they know that evil exists. A lot of them have tasted it, it's been confronted by it, right? Well, if evil exists, and so does good, so does good. So they come in with this experiential knowledge and awareness that for a long time was denied until the effects of putting away the transcendent, putting away permanency, putting away constancy, the effects of this moral relativism, this philosophical relativism, this cultural relativism was experienced. So it's no longer, my catechism completely changed. It turned into, how do we find Christ? It became much more experiential, much more pragmatic, and much more immediate. And that's because the culture has changed. So we live in kind of a cultural catastrophe and crisis. We really do, but very often crisis can be very creative, and we're seeing that too. So we'll start out with that. How does that sound, Jeremy?
Yeah, that's a lot to digest.
Yeah,
Let's pick some kind of angle, I guess, and then go down that path.
yeah.
So, I would say something that strikes me is that when a person lives on the surface of life and has any sort of alleged contact with anything beyond that, that contact is strictly propositional. In other words, just empty words, right? I believe, I do not believe, the soul, the not soul, the this and the that. There's really nothing to speak of. And as you mentioned, when people feel real angst, right? And real existential terror, for example, real depression, real anxiety, then
Yeah.
it really hits like, wow, what do I do with myself? What do I make of life? Right? When a person is fine on the continual merry-go-round of concerning transient desires, right? I want to eat. And then I want to sleep, and then I want to do what comes after eating. Then I want to go to work a little, earn a little money, go on vacation. No problem, no questions. But I think man, by man meaning men and women, we have courtesy of being Homo sapiens. We have what can be called a rational consciousness. Right? We have some sort of awareness, dim as it might be, that something is off if we live strictly the animal life.
Yep.
Right? We don't see that a cow is disturbed by being a cow grazing all day. We don't see that other animals have any issue. They can be perfectly content as long as their bodily needs and maybe some basic social needs like monkeys playing with each other are met. But we can't be content. And I think when we face that discontent, right, when we say, no, the animal life is not enough, simply being on the hamster wheel of desires and their satisfaction is not enough, I
Yeah.
think that's when that gives people the opportunity to really sincerely ask, what is the situation, right? What I do.
Yeah. I mean, you're saying a lot. You're saying a lot. Um, the cow is content because it's true to its nature. Okay. And because it's true, this is orthodoxy. And because it's true to its nature, it glorifies God. God is glorified when something he creates is true to its nature. It fulfills what it was created. I don't even want to say it that way because it sounds so utilitarian, pragmatic. But when man is not a cow, because man is created ultimately to become a son of God. Okay.
Mm,
And so God is glorified when man is true to his nature in much the same way when as the cow is true it's to its nature or the dog to its nature.
right.
Okay. Everything has a nature, right? Well, man is created to be a son of God. And so man is completed in Christ. Christ is the completion of man. So we can look at Jesus and what can we say about Jesus? Well, Jesus is the complete man. He's the complete man. Okay. And this theme is all through Western history, every man and everything, and even kind of the Ubermensch, is a distortion and inversion of that. But the category exists because the category is fundamentally a state of being. Now, you said something really interesting. It's the propositions. Here's the problem with a lot of Western Christianity and why it can't speak to the contemporary crisis. They think that truth is contained in the proposition.
Mm,
Okay. So if you just perceive the proposition correctly, or if you arrange the proposition in some kind of rational order, you will see the face of God.
mm,
But what's lost here is the sense that God is apprehended through the heart. And when I say apprehended, I mean captured, because God reveals himself to us, but that revelation must be experienced. And that experience, because Christianity is fundamentally experiential, that experience is occurs when man opens his heart. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And we've been kind of swamped with the Enlightenment assumption that all knowledge is rationally attained, and the Enlightenment project is crashing down around us. That's one of the reasons why we see the upsurge in the occult in the culture. It's crashing down, which makes orthodoxy particularly relevant because it's a religion of the heart. It's a religion of the purification of the heart. So it's not even a religion in kind of the sense of not it's not academic, right? It's not academic. It's fundamentally experiential.
yeah, those are some excellent points, Father. Yeah, so to that point, the way that I think can make it palpable is that, first of all, let's say we take a parrot. We can teach the parrot anything, right? So far as it is within the parrot's capacities, vocal capacities, but the parrot will always be a parrot. Further, we can teach a small child to say a whole bunch of things, but the small child will only be a small child. So the only way to attain to the experience of a mature human adult is to become a mature human adult.
Mm-hmm.
Not speak my way to it. There's nothing I can say with my lips, right? There's nothing I can ape off of somebody else. There's no theory that I can have. There's nothing I can read in a book. There's no formula that I can recite. I have to actually mature and take advantage of time, the passage of time, and become that which I'm supposed to be. Now,
Yeah.
point, to that point, the question is, what is it that one is supposed to be? And I think we can try to frame what Orthodox Christianity, for example, calls finding Christ. We can try to frame it in empirical psychological terms, just so that it is understood in a way that is not merely propositional, right? Because again, I think if we simply say something, we're just simply saying something. So if you want to hop in, or I can add some more things.
Well, yes. Um, use the word psychological, and when I hear that word, I go, my alarm bells go off until I perceive of that word in its original Greek form. Okay, psychos,
Mm,
soul,
right.
soul, because a lot of modern psychology is materialist based. In other words, they see man as just a biological animal, and so they kind of chart the functions and operations of the mind, thinking that, well, if we can rearrange that, it's this propositional knowledge again. Okay, we can make the person a good functioning person. But if we mean psychological in terms of the soul, which includes the heart and the mind, then we can start thinking in what you described of how do we become a whole person. When it says in the Bible, be perfect as I am perfect, the perfection there isn't, and it isn't kind of a moral perfection or physical perfection. It's a, it's be whole as I am whole, be complete as I am complete. And so when we speak of the psychological, here's something that's really beautiful. I deal with a lot of guys and, big problems, pornography and self abuse and all that. It's kind of well, I go back to the Soviet period, right? The two elements of the Soviet economy that really worked well was the military and vodka production. Well,
Mm,
the military is self-evident, but you might say, well, why vodka? Well, because the soul crushing numbness of Soviet Marxist planned societies, right? It crushes the man. That 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 pain had to be there had to be a salve for that. The men had to remain pacified, right? And vodka did that, and you had a nation of alcoholics. Okay. And it destroyed men, it destroyed the character of men. In our age, I contend that pornography is there for the same function, okay, to deaden ourselves to that soul crushing pain. All right. But now here's the relevant point. And the men that I deal with to get off that stuff, and you can get off it. One of the first things that happens once they apply the ascetical self-disciplines, once they learn how to purify the heart, and we get this from our Orthodox tradition. One of the first things that happens is that their mind clarifies,
mm,
begin to see more clearly. It's not in the proposition that the clarity comes, it's in the purification of the heart.
yeah.
And if we use the term psychological, which is to say the healing of the soul, to describe that process, I'm fine with the word. And that's how a man becomes more whole.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, I would say that construing psychology in mechanical or medical materialistic terms is deeply problematic, and I think it can be dismantled pretty easily, kind of
Yes.
on a philosophical level, right? So We have a unity of experience, and one of the elements in our experience is the anatomy. And correlating with certain changes of consciousness or of our experience can be certain other empirical modifications as concern the brain. Put simply,
Mhm.
I'm in a CAT scan and I hear a story and one part lights up. I hear math, another part lights up. Okay, there's a correlation there. Right? There are cases of individuals, for example, with conditions like hydrocephalus missing up to 97% of their brain. At least one documented case, perfectly well documented, not hearsay. Math student, 130 IQ, graduated college with essentially no brain, right? To the point where neuroplasticity is insufficient to account for it. So the idea that a person, that intelligence, that rational intelligence, can be boiled down to one aspect of our experience, which would be our brain, is nonsense. It's not philosophically
Yeah.
supportable at all.
Yes. I agree with that.
Yeah. So if we kind of set that aside and we do consider psychology as a question of, as you said, healing the soul, healing the individual, and charting a path for the individual to attain to their consummation, to the consummation of their humanity, of their powers, we can try to offer some um, direction for how that maturation would have to go. And I would say that, or a way that I've used before is to ask in any given thing that a person pursues, be it that I want a cookie or I want a professional promotion or I want the new home. What is the dynamics of that desire? And when we think about it, I think it goes something like this. Right? Let's say that the question is a promotion. First, I have to become myself such that has this job. Right? Out of
Mhm.
all the jobs out there, I only care about my job.
Mhm.
Of all the things out there, I care about my things. So I have to be myself that has this job, or myself that is the owner of my vehicle, for example. Having become myself such that is, let's make it easier, such that is the owner of the vehicle, it's me that is the owner of the vehicle. The vehicle is a part of me. I've engulfed it in my sense of self. And now I think, what would perfection look like for this part of myself, meaning the vehicle? What would perfect power, persistence, preeminence, permanency, other P words, whatever, eternity,
Mhm.
infinity, absoluteness look like concerning this car? Well, it has to exist. It has to work. It has to be nice, right? Maybe I'll get some new rims. I'll clean the insides, this and that. So basically, I'm striving for this eternity, for this perfection, just by the way of the car. And
Yeah.
if you take the example of the job, right? I want perfect power. I want perfect persistence. I don't want to get fired. I want this job and I want to get promoted. I want it to be a pathway to infinity. I take something like working out, the same thing, right? Myself, the body, and I also want
Mhm.
ideal strength. I want to avoid sickness and so forth. So it seems that behind every finite desire is a desire for an infinite object, always, even for somebody that has no relation to any of these ideas whatsoever. The question is, how do we really attain to that infinite object? Because we see that simply pursuing these finite goods will never really get us to any infinite good. We can
Yeah.
hop if you want to keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. It's real interesting. What your questions are really interesting because the desire is there, right? I would say that, okay, everyday experience, everyday decisions, right? That is kind of the crucible of the spiritual life. It's not out there, it's in here and how we treat the neighbor. All right. That's really where the rubber meets the road. That's the place where God can speak. Because he
Mm.
always speaks to the present. Because we only live in the present. That's the only place we live. We don't live in the past. We don't live in the future. The past is gone. The future is not here yet. All we have is the present. So, so the question is, okay, how do we, this is fundamentally the question, how do we deal with desire, right? How do we deal with desire?
And how do we deal with desire, but also how do we attain to that ultimate consummation of our nature, which is always reaching out for these little things, right? Again,
Right.
I'm going to attain a perfect happiness through this vacation. through this meal, through this dinner, through this event. Oh, I didn't. Well, let me try it again and again and again. And while we remain the same, right? I remain the same animal that I was, the same creature. I never really mature. I never really changed throughout my whole life. So, what does, for example, Orthodox Christianity have to say about how to get out of that cycle, so to say, and really get on that road to true maturity and true humanity?
Seeing that your neighbor is your life. Your neighbor is your life. The commandment of God, it exists as a proposition, but the proposition in this case has a moral imperative to show us the actual structure of our soul. Okay, the ontological structure of our soul. You will love God with all your heart, soul, body, mind, and strength. And this is Jesus speaking, Matthew 25, and your neighbor as yourself. And the second is as important as the first. So we have to step outside of ourselves, in a sense, by serving the neighbor, because your neighbor is your life. No one exists self-contained, so we don't define ourselves by our desires. We do not define ourselves by our desires. Okay? We find ourselves in the neighbor, loving the neighbor. Okay? And so that what that does then is you're not the sole reference point of your own existence. It's not me and God. It's me, God, and my neighbor. Okay, which entails, I would say, now let's down the road a little bit, but the purification of desire. The purification of desire. So a practical example. I need tools to do my work. I need tools. I need a car. I need a cell phone. I need a computer. I need a place to live. Okay. I want my car to be a reliable car. I want it to be a good car. I don't want it to be a piece of junk that I'm worried it's not going to start in the morning. I need it to start. Okay. I've got a cell phone. I talk a lot on the phone. It's got to be a good phone, and I got to have the unlimited plan. Okay. So those are quality things. My computer, it's got to be a good computer. All right. Is there anything inherently wrong with that? Is that selfish? I don't think so.
No.
Because if the tools I need, I want my tools to be high quality and I want them to function. Okay. I'm not going to buy a piece of junk because there's some, I think that there's some kind of imputed moral good in that. There's not. Okay. It's a tool. It's a tool. But seeing it as a tool and not an extension of who I am, I would say that that's the purification of the desire. Okay. Now, what is the goal? And the goal, I think, answers your question, or at least it elucidates a possible answer to your question, is that, but it is in accordance with the commandment, is that I have to serve my neighbor. My life isn't my own. I don't possess my own life. Okay, it's God who's given me life, and it's God who I must serve. And that service to God most often is directed in service to my neighbor,
Yeah.
helping him.
Yeah.
That's where I think it lies.
Yeah, that's an excellent answer, Father. I could just maybe add a couple of things to there. I would say what a person does, I think it can only be understood by considering who the person is. So if we take one of Elon Musk's Tesla robots and we set it up to help our neighbor, the robot is not doing good.
Right.
The robot's actions have no moral worth whatsoever because the thing, it's an object. If I
Mhm.
help my neighbor out of impurity of motive, for example, I, the good person, I, the charitable one, I, the good Samaritan, I, the nice one, or I, the one that wants something later on, I'll give my neighbor some sugar to get some salt later, then my actions are not love of neighbor. I would venture to put forth that the only way to truly love one's neighbor as oneself is to see oneself in one's neighbor. And I,
Yes.
for that, we need to find a depth of selfhood that can be seen in one's neighbor, right? Because in the state of nature, it's a fact. My body is different than my neighbor's body. I,
Yes.
my mind is different than my neighbor's mind. My psyche or psychology, whatever we would mean by that term, is different than my neighbor's psychology. And yet, I still need to see myself in my neighbor. How do I do that? To connect in with, or you want to hop in, or
Yeah. Well, we have the body and there's individual particularity in the body. Okay. People are individuated, but there is the soul, there is nature. We're actually all connected. That's the reality. If we're materialists and we think that the only place truth can be found is in matter, then we become atomistic and we bounce against each other, and we see the neighbor primarily in terms of how he can serve me.
Yeah.
And that's actually a violation of the ontological ordering, which is to say that we are all connected. We are. And so when we love our neighbor, we love ourselves. If we love ourselves, we will love our neighbor.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then the question becomes, though, how do I find that depth of selfhood that I can love my neighbor as myself? How do I remove that alienation that is a necessary part of the state of nature, right? The spider eats the fly, the bird eats the spider, the snake eats the bird. That's how it goes. If I'm in that same order, there's no way I'm going to love my neighbor. I cannot do it. It's impossible. So I would offer that and kind of connecting with what we were saying earlier, we have to mature out of our psychophysiological being, right? We have to venture forth out of our kind of encased animality,
Yeah.
the way of which we are certainly and necessarily alienated concerning other people. And I would say, to use Christian terminology, we have to die to self. We have to die to live enough while we're still alive to ourself as animal, while we're still ruled by our desires, by our passions. There's no love to speak of, I think. Right? And why that is a good for us. Right? We were saying all finite desires indicate desire for an infinite object. I want a coffee or I want a donut ultimately because I want this infinite eternal good
Yeah.
per the aforementioned reasoning. And I think the only way to get to that aforementioned good, it's not by aggrandizing one's name, right? I can build pyramids like the pharaohs. Still,
Mm.
no, it's not going to go. I can become the
Yeah.
most famous person in the world. No go. I can have 10 billion, if that was possible, social media followers. Same thing. I'm still a little critter. So I think it's instead of going that way of self-aggrandizement, go the other way of death to self. Right? Live a dying life where I progressively kind of that animality is burnt out of me. And then hopefully I can reach a depth of selfhood wherein that such that I can see in my neighbor. I can see my neighbor in myself. And then, like you said, Father, in loving my neighbor, I love myself, but
Mm.
with the stipulation that enough difference is had, enough individuality is permitted where relationships are possible. Because if there's no difference at all, right? If there's nobody to love, right, there has to be some difference. Ultimately, my neighbor has his or her own will, and there's enough separation where a relationship between persons can be had, grounded yet in that unity, which I think can only come from that death of self.
Yeah. So let me sharpen that and reframe it just a little bit. St. Maximus the Confessor says that all desire, this is what you're saying, all desire is rooted in the desire for God. So the soul ultimately seeks God because it knows that in God it'll find its life. Okay? But we're not Buddhists. We don't, the Buddhist seeks to strip himself of all personality and all self identity, all personal distinctiveness, right, to kind of melt into the universal energy,
Mm,
okay, into the universal God. Um, Christianity doesn't negate the person. Christianity posits the person in its fullness.
consummates the person, right?
Yeah. And so this, as we learn to serve our neighbor, what happens is this is really beautiful. Our personal distinctiveness, our personal particularity, our gifts, our talents, right? They can emerge and they can be fulfilled and they can be expressed in its proper context and fullness. okay? But only when they're given away, when they're
Mhm.
given to the neighbor. It's a paradox to the materialist world, okay? Because we're kind of inundated with kind of a Malthusian scarcity model too, right? I gotta have it. I gotta have it. It's got to be for me. I got to be okay. But the gospel says something ultimate. Now we see this exemplified ultimately in Christ, the whole man. Okay, the whole man, the complete man, the perfect man. Well, what does he do? He voluntarily sacrifices himself on the cross. Why? Well, two reasons. For God so loved the world, number one, but also for the joy that was set before him. So, this voluntary self sacrifice on our part, which entails what the Apostle Paul calls putting to death the death that is in us, is also the pathway to joy. And that joy becomes our strength because our soul yearns for that experience of joy and wholeness and completeness. These intangibles that a materialistic person can't really grasp except as an abstract proposition and certainly cannot experience, although his soul is yearning for it.
Mm. No, those are really good points, Father. One thing you said, I think that's very important, is right that many, or I would say probably most, if not all, Oriental philosophies do emphasize the annihilation of individuality, but in a different way than that which is promoted by the philosophical traditions related to Christianity, such as Platonism, Neoplatonism. I think Neoplatonism, for example, and therefore Christianity says that we first have to gain our soul before we can sacrifice it. We first have to become a person before we can give ourselves up. And like you said, give up our capacities and exercise them to the fullest extent. Right? Versus from the Oriental point of view, I don't necessarily need to do that. I can be a child emotionally and mentally and just kind of persuade myself that I'm one with the cosmic energy, so to say, or that I'm one with some or another a cosmic consciousness that eliminates the possibility of plurality. Right, so and that leads to one result concerning people, and the Christian the approach leads to another result concerning people, which is like you said. I think the goal is not to annihilate ourselves into some kind of stupor and stupidity. Right, it's to become the fullest version of what a human being can be, and I think that is certainly predicated on self-sacrifice. It is predicated on me willingly, wittingly, freely giving myself away. Right? A marriage, for example, is a great example. If two people that have not really yet matured into real persons become married, it's not going to work. Right? Children do not, well, should not certainly get married, and that would not be a real marriage. It has to be two distinct individualities, but who willingly, freely choose to sacrifice themselves to the other, not in a sick way, not in a way where they meld together or whatnot,
I
in a
know.
proper way. And
Yeah,
perhaps that could characterize our relationship to the absolute, right? To that absolute and eternal good. We can't just, drink ourselves into a coma or take enough psychedelic substances to get rid of ourselves. We have to live that dying life and choose to give up whatever it is that we have. Father, real quick, the time here it says is running out. If we want to
okay.
keep discussing, I can send you another link and we can pick up. Or if you have to go, it's up to you.
No, no, that's fine. I have free time. So let's continue.
Yeah, okay. So let me send you another link. It's a
Okay.
minute left, and then just click on it again, and we can resume. And then I would hopefully be able to stitch these two together.
Sounds
Something.
sounds
Right.
good. All right.
All right. All right, Father, we just took a short break, intermission, but we
Yeah.
can pick right back up.
Yeah.
So we were talking about how to navigate our way from being stuck in this cycle of nonstop desires, i.e., the animal life. I need
Hmm.
to eat, I need to sleep, and so forth, and seeking our happiness strictly and solely in that sphere. There's nothing wrong. Forget about nothing wrong. It is completely necessary, obviously, to want to eat and to want to sleep, and we should do
Yeah.
that to the best of our abilities in the most healthy way. But when that's all that we have, and when our sole hopes in life concern the next event, right? I'm looking forward to the vacation. And then I also have a second vacation booked because I'm going to be sad after the first one, right? And
Yeah.
then maybe a third one too. And I'm looking forward to becoming richer, and I'm looking forward, right? My entire world is narrowed down to this sphere, strictly a finite, transient desires. My character is, if I have one, is immersed only in the temporal. And then I think one goal of our human development, and certainly from a view that religion would advocate, would be to contribute to the creation of a character that is somewhat above time, that has found its own, say, principle, its own life, and is not stuck in that constantly shifting moment, right? That we suppose that the animals are stuck in. And I think that is courtesy of our nature of being Homo sapiens, right? There's something about us. We cannot simply live at the level of the brute and hope to be a brute. We're going to dip beneath. And if we try to live strictly as an animal, we're not going to be an innocent like an animal. Like you said at the beginning, a cow, it glorifies because a cow is being itself. A
Yeah.
cow is following its nature. If we live like the cow, we don't follow our nature and we dip beneath the cow. We can't, oh, I'm just a happy-go-lucky critter. Mine, all I do is eat and sleep. No, we're going to dip beneath that. So we want to explore, I think, what can we do? How do we structure our life? What do we pursue practically in order to move away from that embroidered condition and towards a higher and happier life?
Hmm. Well, it's recognizing that the body is fundamentally inert. Okay, because if all we have is our desires and there's nothing transcendent, we're still searching for the transcendent because that's what our nature is. But if we're not looking beyond just our desires, then we will become a slave to them. But our body's inert. Our body has to be disciplined. This is why, and this is why we fast in the church. But we fast in the church because the fasting is fundamentally a discipline that helps us reorder the desires into their proper categories. Okay, so the desire, like the hunger is not bad. Hunger keeps your body alive. We're saved in our bodies. Okay, but if it turns into gluttony, then we become slaves to that desires. The desires expand, right? And we are being driven by those desires instead of mastering them.
Yeah. In a further, I think, pitfall is that desires that concern, for example, our physiological needs, such as the stomach, such as sleep, built into them is our limits, right? No matter what a glutton I am, if I keep eating and eating, I'm going to get sick, right? And I'm just going to start, the food is going to start exiting. But that same attitude can apply to desires that are not finite. We can sort of say spiritualize and certain appetites of ours to where they become the infinite game that we're playing. Money being an obvious example. I can never have too much money. I can never
Right.
have too much fame. I can never have too much power. It's the same animal mentality. It's the same creaturely life, albeit with human rationality and human understanding applied to that animality, if that makes sense. Right? It's like if we could imagine a lion with human rational consciousness. And the lion can understand not just, all right, here's my area, but it could say, I want to dominate, 100 square miles, 200 square miles. I want to have outposts all across the continent to
Yeah.
make sure that my power is promoted. So I think that's kind of what we do. Where that those lower selves of ours that you said, for example, that asceticism ought to address and reorder our desires, they remain, right? We're kind of confined to them, to that lower self of ours ourselves. And yet we spiritualize it, we humanize it, we apply our intelligence, and therefore the needs of that lower self or selves become infinite. Again, infinite power, infinite pleasure, infinite money, and so forth. And yet we see that even that does not satisfy us.
Yeah.
And no matter how much power I procure, no matter how many rounds of pleasure seeking I go on, no matter how much money I have, I still remain lacking because I still remain that critter, right? I've just taken that critter's desires and blown them up.
Yes. And then if we remember Saint Maximus, all desire, even the inordinate desires, the gluttony, the sexual anarchy, the lust for power, right, is is rooted in the desire for God. You think about that. Okay, so healing then, the healing of the person, the fulfillment of the person as person in their own particular distinctiveness, their own gifts, their own abilities, even their own interests, right, comes through the purification of desire. It comes through ascetic self-discipline.
Yeah. But even to, I think, desire ascetic self-discipline in a way such that could lead to true purification, to true wholeness, holiness, goodness. I think that can be connected with another wider kind of dilemma, right? Which is the role of freedom in our, as we would call it, salvation. And here, I think one way to frame it that seems to be coherent and seems to be true is that a person has to exercise their freedom correctly, to give up their self, to
Yeah.
allow their self to die. Nothing and no one can take our self from us, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a way that will be conducive to our good. We can have our self taken from us through drugs, through alcohol, through sleep deprivation, through getting hit in the head, through emotional and psychological collapses, but that will not lead to our good. Needless
Mm-hmm.
to say, we can annihilate ourselves, but we cannot attain to the aforementioned consummation of the self through these means. I think the only means is to freely, voluntarily give ourselves up. Using the analogy, for example, of the marriage that in the previous sequel, we
Yeah.
mentioned. So I think that ultimately, when and tell me if you agree, Father, when we encounter people that are not anywhere approximating any such path that could lead to their own true and highest good, they are in some way or another complicit in that. Their heart is hard. Right? Their will is turned inward. They do not want to give themselves up. They may not have had opportunities to reach the pinnacles of goodness and greatness that maybe somebody raised in a certain family, in a certain environment might have had, but they had some opportunities to listen to their conscience, to assume a certain attitude towards the notion of something higher over and above oneself, right? To respond in hearing some kind of moral message. Maybe they heard a sermon once, maybe a friend gave them some advice, a parent, something like this, right? There's some little involvement that they had, right? That makes them complicit in what they are now, which is just being solidified in that psychophysiological animality. So if then that person says, all right, well, now I want to be superior to others, so I'm going to fast, I'm going to assume the ascetical lifestyle, they're not going to get out of their predicament with what that means. They might aggrandize their narcissism. I'm actually better than 90% of people because I fast and I do certain things that they don't do, but they won't, I think, by that means be lifted up out of themselves. And I would offer that the only way to do that is to face oneself, to confront oneself, to humble oneself, and then hope for what would be called grace, what would be called an external power to aid us. We can't lift ourselves out of a bog while we're drowning. Well, we can acknowledge that we're in a bog. We can kind of at least reach our hand out. If we don't even reach our hand out and we just have it clasped, or we even deny that we're in a bog, then help is not forthcoming, I would suppose.
I think that I think that what can break through that, if a person is in their own existential suffering because of that particular orientation, and a lot of people are, um, sometimes this isn't a comprehensive answer. This is what I've seen. Um, Sometimes what will break through is suffering. Sometimes sometimes the suffering gets so great that the only place you can look to is up. And God, being merciful, extends his mercy to you no matter you know, what our sin is. Okay. What is sin? Sin is missing the mark. Sin is looking for God in places where God is not. Sin is looking for light in places where there's only darkness. Okay. That's ignorance, sometimes it's willful, often it's both. Okay. But it does cause a suffering. Is that suffering a judgment from God? Well, you could call it that, I guess. But usually, what it is, it comes because that path leads to that internal disordering.
It's necessary, necessary
Yeah,
consequence.
man is working against his own nature.
Right.
Okay, while he's trying to fill the void in his soul. All right. But the other thing, too, is that a man on that search, even if he doesn't know it, if there's an opportunity when he opens up his heart to love, and it's usually the love of another person, right? That can spark the renewal because what the soul is searching for is that love. But not having the love of God, what's the next best thing? It's the love of another person, right? And that love is just selflessly given, and it's a seed, and it begins the transformation in the heart.
Yeah, that's an
If a
excellent.
man if a man adopts religion just so he can advance himself as some kind of morally superior being or whatever it is, right? He's not going to find it. And people do that. They become real religious,
Oh, yeah.
but they're still suffering from the same malady.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's an excellent point, Father. Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. One concerning sin, it is missing the mark, but if we tie it to freedom, right? Because, for example, a Greek view or a view associated with a thinker like Socrates would be that we only err unintentionally. If we only know how to do good, what the right thing is, we would do it. It's just that we missed the mark. We're not sure. But I think a different view and one more in line with Christianity and its philosophical underpinnings is that we have some range of freedom, right? Namely concerned with will I engage in self-idolatry or will I nullify myself? Will I humble myself or will I not? Will I respond truthfully to some kind of claim that reality seemingly makes upon me or will I lie and deceive? And so I think ultimately sin, maybe in its kind of innermost nature, is that self-idolatry. It's not just the disorder of the soul, of the self. That's a big problem. But as we know, if a person fights the disorder in them, they're fighting the good fight, right?
Yes.
Many,
Yeah.
many lines of disorder enter, especially in today's, as we were saying, decrepit, nihilistic culture. So many areas or so many viruses can be introduced into our soul, into our mind, such that conduce to disorder, right? Be it concerned the passions, all that kind of stuff. But if we fight it, if we take a stand against it, I would say we're probably not the sinner then, right? We're fighting that sin in us.
Well,
But if I accede to it, right, there's some kind of disorder. Let's take some kind of PG example. I like, I've fallen in love with my pillow and I want to marry it, right? I feel a strong attraction towards my pillow. As long as I fight that and I say, no, no, that's crazy. That's nonsense. I'm not going to do it. I'm not a sinner. No problem. I'm fighting a good fight. But if I accede to it, no, no problem. Then that's the problem. And I think I would accede to it from that self-idolatry. How can my desires be wrong? What do you mean? But that's what I want. But I love my pillow. There's nobody can say anything against it. And I personally do love my pillow, but it's just say, all right. So I think it's that self-idolatry that forms the kernel of sin. And further, then that makes a person their own enemy, as you mentioned. And I think we can also demonstrate that logically. If it was true that reality was comprised out of good and evil, truly 50-50, there could be no such thing as evil. So, for example, I go to the ice cream store and there's chocolate and vanilla ice cream. And the only factors that are here in question is just that it's chocolate and vanilla. There is no way to say what is good and what is bad. Nobody can tell me, oh, you're bad for picking chocolate, you're bad for picking vanilla. They would have to cite something outside of that situation. You know what I'm saying?
right.
For
right.
example, price. Oh, you're trying to save money. Why are you picking the more expensive ice cream? You got diabetes. Why are you picking the sugary ice cream? They're gonna have to cite something outside of that situation. But if it's 50-50, there's nothing to say. So if reality is 50% evil and 50% good, then there's nothing to say. Then those that we call evil, then it would be in quotes in this case, are not evil. They're just that's their choice. It's equally valid. So the idea then would be that no, that cannot be, because then if it's 50-50, which one is good? Well, we would have to cite something beyond that and again until we reach only the good, until we reach only the whole, so to say, until we reach only a single reality. And therefore, the person that is evil sins against themselves. They offend themselves in their own court according to their own yardstick, according to their own ruler. And that's what makes them evil. It's not somebody's not evil because somebody else says that they are. I think you're bad. I don't like you. Okay, good for you. You don't like yourself. You're bad for yourself, right? You are becoming increasingly alienated from your own life, from your own good. Right? So I think that's a way to, or that's an essential point, because otherwise it could be said, well, you like this and I like that. You like being good, I like being evil. Who will tell me that I'm evil? Who will tell me that I'm bad? The idea is you yourself tell yourself you're bad. In your own court, you're being judged.
Yeah. You know, freedom, freedom comes out of love. Okay. It's a necessary condition for someone to love, because freedom freedom has to be voluntarily, love has to be voluntarily given. A person has to be free to love, because then it's love. If there's no freedom, then there's no love. There's only coercion. All right. And that's all that remains. Okay. We become slaves, to the Ubermensch, ultimately, whoever that might be. And that could be a demigod. Okay. That could be Thor. Okay. That could be you just, you're just obedient out of fear. There's no love there. So the freedom is necessary. John Calvin had such a fear of human freedom, and that's why he came up with a doctrine to deny it. Okay, to deny it.
Luther as well.
Yeah, the godfather of modern secularism, actually. This is one of the reasons why we're in the problems we are. But having that was a political statement, that was a polemical statement, but I thought I probably shouldn't have said it. But nonetheless, so what is the freedom for here? The freedom is so radical, we can walk away from our creator. It's that radical to a degree, Okay. So what is the freedom for? The freedom is so that we might learn how to obey. That's what it is for. The freedom is so that we might sacrifice and lose our life for our neighbor. Without human freedom, that's not possible.
Yeah.
And that becomes the necessity because of freedom and of how we're created. Now, how do we live? Well, we want to live a righteous life. But what does righteousness mean? Righteousness means a rightly ordered life. Okay? According to reality as it really is. Okay, and on a human level, ground level, what that means is that we are true to our own natures. We are created in the image and likeness of God. We overcome the evil in ourselves. And what is the root of human evil? Well, the root of human evil, it's that we live a lie instead of the truth. Now, we might live that lie in ignorance, but it's still a lie in the sense that it doesn't describe reality as it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some great themes there. Freedom, and misusing and abusing our freedom. I think that is a central point, and a way to appreciate it. I think that I find useful is always to try to remind ourselves that we are at least attempting, fail as we do, we're attempting to speak of, in speaking of themes like this in philosophical and religious traditions. The attempt is to describe as you said, reality as it really is. And a big stumbling block there is supposing that reality as it really is what the physics textbook teaches, right? Is the astronomy textbook what it teaches.
Yeah.
It's the atoms and the Higgs boson. And that's really reality as it is, space and time. And this is, in the humanities, there's theology, and then there's this and that. So I think that's an inversion, ontological inversion. The phenomenal world is experienced. That's all that it is. We cannot conceive of what it would mean for any elements of experience, any elements of the phenomenal world to exist in and of their own self. Right? We
Hmm.
cannot understand what it would mean for some kind of Kantian thing in itself, quote unquote, to exist that somehow gets in touch with a mind that is connected to a brain, all of this stuff. So I think if, say, in the tradition of philosophy, a philosophy called idealism, is one that is most conducive to religious thought. I would say objective idealism, not subjective idealism, where it's a question of my imagination or solipsism or this or that. Basically, reality is unified. It's not as if there's these things in themselves that exist to and for their own self, and then there's minds that somehow map onto those things in themselves and this and that. So that's a whole different can of worms. However, it's just to say that when we critically approach the question of what is reality, we can open ourselves up to the
Hmm.
proposition that reality really is what religion tries to describe, what high philosophy tries to describe, what
Yeah.
high in true poetry try to describe. That is actually and really the reality, so far as those attempts succeed. And the stuff that is in physics textbooks is at best transactional and can help us do certain things like launch projectiles and this and
It
that.
explains it. It explains the operations of the material world. And it often precisely so, right? Because it becomes predictive. We can predict because of that.
Yeah, certain rules and regularities governing objects and things. Again, I think a real shorthand way to understand this is, I go to sleep, I have a really realistic dream, and everything that can be experienced in waking life can be dreamt. And yet it's perfectly clear to us that in a dream, we can never go from those experiences to this kind of naive, naturalistic, ontological account. Oh, really? In the dream, things are made up out of these little dots called atoms, and then the photons bounce off of the atoms and enter into the eye, and then somehow the mind, which is an epiphenomenon of your brain, all this kind of stuff. We just have experience, we have appearances, and they unfold according to, in our dreams, presumably idiosyncratic, personal kind of things. I'm worried about something, and then I dream about what I'm worried about. Objective reality is not a dream. Then the word dream would lose all sense. Dream is precisely an aspect of overall waking experience. Right? I'm awake and then I'm asleep. But epistemically, meaning concerning our knowledge, waking reality is the same thing. There's nothing that we can do to waking reality. There's no measurements that we can make. There's no tunnels under Europe that we can build that would ever give us insight as to the nature of reality in this way. I think the only way to get to that nature is to think in the way that maybe a detective would think concerning a mystery, right? And the way that a story unfolds, and is to ask ourselves in that way what is going on.
Yeah.
And we learn to think like that. Then something like freedom, for example, to our point, right? That, for example, the extent what exists in light of certain telos, certain purposes, certain ends, such as involve the application of freedom. That begins to make sense and sound quite plausible. Well, while we're stuck in that materialistic framework, oh yeah, it's the stars over there, and the little electrons are moving around. There's no way to really take these things seriously, and that's something
Yeah.
that
Yeah, but Jeremy,
I
I'm
don't
worried
know.
we're getting so abstract, we're going to lose our audience.
Yeah, you're right.
We should
It's all got to
come
be
back
brought back to the concrete.
come back to earth.
Uh,
Yeah.
but to bring it to earth, the realities that religion speaks about, that philosophy speaks about, that we're in our small way trying to point attention to, we're aiming for reality as it really is, for really, really, truly what there is. Not for some kind of metaphor, not for some kind of poem, for some kind of section of studies, the humanities, for reality as it ontologically, existentially, whatever word we would prefer, as it really truly is. Right?
Well, it comes down to how do you treat the server in the restaurant?
Yeah.
How do you see the server? Is she an appendage of the corporation, of the company, whatever? Is she just there to give you your food? Or is this a human being making a living?
And is it myself in that person? Do I see myself in that person? Can I will their good? Can I accept the person where they are, what they are, and then ask myself, what can I do to give them a little push to my capacities in the right direction?
Yeah, you begin by giving her a decent tip.
Well, that's asking too much, Father. Come on. Let's not let's
No,
not
that's
get
how
too
you do it
extreme. I'll
because
smile. Huh?
she's a person working there trying to make a living, trying to pay her bills. That's the brute fact reality.
Yeah.
Okay?
Right.
That's the brute fact reality. And if you can see life on those terms and see the person, if you can see the person, you're on the right track. That's my philosophy. You're on the right track.
Yeah.
Treat her well. Don't disrespect her. Same with the person working at 7-Eleven behind the counter. Okay, don't disrespect people, right? And just don't. And I think that's a great place to start.
I think so. Treat every person as one would want to be treated, but supposing one to be more or less healthy, right? Because if a person enjoys self-laceration or something, or what is it? What's the word? Say masochism, something like this. Don't treat other people like that.
Yeah.
Imagine that I was somewhat healthy and then treat people as I would then want to be treated. If I was somewhat healthy, I don't want to be disrespected in some kind of right, whatever people do. I want to be respected. I want to be treated well. I want to be educated. I want to enrich my mind, my spirit. Treat other people like that, right? And never assume that I know where a person stands in the scheme of things, right? Oh, that person's not as educated as me. That person is lesser than me. They seem no. We have no idea who each person is, and I think if there's a little goodness in the heart whatever the other conditions might be, that person has indefinite worth that cannot be put into any kind of
Because,
utilitarian terms.
because the battles that rage in them and the things that confront them are as great as the battles that rage in you and the things that confront you.
Right?
We forget that.
Each in his or her own way.
Yeah. Yes.
All right, Father. Well, anything else you want to add, or we're gonna call it a day? What do you?
Uh, well, I've enjoyed this very much,
Likewise.
and maybe we could do it again sometime.
I hope so. I hope so. I
Okay.
hope some people will benefit. Let me
Okay.
just,
God bless you. And I know you're building out a new channel,
yeah,
and I hope my contribution contributes to that. I'd like to see you successful.
I wouldn't doubt it. Thank you, Father. Here, I'll pause
Okay.
the recording once they were stopping. All right.